All right, hello Alaska. My name's Adam White. It is time for the January 2025 edition of Advocacy with Adam. I apologize from the very beginning about my voice. I've been sick since Christmas, and here it is, the 21st of January. I am very much well on the way to recovery from that, but I can tell you, you don't want to get pneumonia during Christmas. I wouldn't even give it 1 star. I do not recommend. Anyway, I'm back from that for the most part. You can hear it in my voice still. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump right in. I've got a lot of things to talk about for you. Some things I can give you a little bit of details on. Other things I'm going to kind of hold back, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. So yesterday, we had a new president installed. Inauguration day was yesterday. The Biden administration handed over the responsibilities of the presidency to President Trump. And with that, even regardless of political party affiliations or any other kind of drama that may or may not be when it comes to presidential elections, there's usually a shakeup. There's usually a little bit of a mix-up with cabinet positions. Obviously, the incoming president wants to see their people in some of those positions, and so there's some Senate confirmation hearings that are happening. Secretary of Transportation being one of those, and it is not uncommon that the heads of certain other parts of the government tender their resignation. Now, whether or not they're accepted or not, but just as a courtesy, when there's a new administration that comes in, a lot of these kind of appointed positions high up, like the FAA administrator, typically will submit their resignation. Now, Mike Whitaker, the FAA administrator, did such a thing several months ago, announced that he was going to submit his resignation effective January 20th. And there's all kinds of things going on around about speculations as to why and all of that. But to be honest with you, none of that really matters right now. So the FAA is going to need a new FAA administrator. So what does that mean, and what does that look like, and what's the process and all that stuff? Well, you may be remembering that, it is a Senate confirmation that has to happen for that position. But with the Secretary of Transportation also being part of a confirmation process, we are currently in that process right now. And so Sean Duffy is up for Secretary of Transportation, and I can tell you from the things that I'm reading online, there's probably not going to be much opposition from any side of the aisle to go ahead and confirm Sean Duffy for a position of Secretary of Transportation. I will tell you that traditionally, again, a lot of times these kinds of political appointments, they start at the top and they work their way down. So it would be somewhat inappropriate to go through the process of appointing an FAA administrator when there is no Secretary of Transportation. So we'll get to the FAA administrator eventually. We're not there at this point, and I'll be keeping a close eye as to who floats to the top as potential candidates for that position and see how their track record may or may not help us here in Alaska with General Aviation. So that's one of the big things I'm watching right now. One of the other things that I've been looking at is some of the pre-filed bills that have been showing up in Juneau, because the state legislators are about to start meeting, and they pre-file a lot of bills to kind of get ahead and get things ready and prime the pump for things to happen there in Juneau. So I've been reading through a lot of those pre-filed bills, not seeing anything too concerning or too alarming at this point. I've earmarked a couple of bills that I'm going to keep an eye on because they have the potential for possibly kind of creeping around into some other areas. So I'll keep a close eye on that for us. Speaking of Juneau, I will be heading to Juneau here in a few weeks as part of my role with the Governor's Aviation Advisory Board, and I represent the membership-based aviation associations in the state of Alaska on that board. We will be having our annual meeting in Juneau and then go for some walks through the halls there at the Capitol building and being able to be a resource for our legislators about aviation issues here in the state. So looking forward to that trip again. Probably will be late February, so I may not have an update for you for the February briefing here as to how that trip went. It may have to be the March briefing before I can tell you what happened there, just because of the calendar and the timelines. So let's move on to some other things we're seeing in the news. The transition to 100 low lead is still being worked in the lower 48. It's still being worked here in Alaska. Still heavily involved with that. I've been keeping up with a lot of media reports of potential lawsuits and actual lawsuits and things that are being brought up as concerns of supply chain issues and other things. So I will tell you that it makes me feel a little better that the folks in the lower 48 are starting to not just say some of the things that we have been saying for many years already, but are starting to actually use that as things that need to be done, as prioritizing those things to get it accomplished. Primarily supply chain concerns, primarily talking about certification standards and storage capabilities and availability in enough areas and all those kinds of things. So it's good to see that the lower 48 is starting to think through some of the same things we've been talking about now for several years, because now we're hopefully going to get some traction and be able to go through and address some of those problems and try to tackle those issues. And it's a little unfortunate that it took it to get to the level of becoming a problem in places like California before it was actually being addressed at this level. So either way, regardless of how it happened, those things are starting to be addressed and starting to be worked on. So that's positive news. Still no front runner when it comes to what is Alaska going to be using for a potential replacement for leaded fuel. If you remember some of my comments previously and the deep dive that I did with Crowley about what this could look like, Ross St. John at Crowley is a great asset for us in the aviation community when it comes to these fuel concerns and issues. And trying to figure out which one fuel we're going to do here in Alaska. And so we're still working that issue. So still too early to tell for that, but trust me, we're on it. We're still talking about it. Okay, so looking at some other things, I did file a public comment letter to the FAA about a potential decommissioning of a remote communications outlet down in southeast Alaska. The Williams Mountain RCO was potentially up for being decommissioned. I have not received final word as to what the FAA's decision is about that decommissioning. I reached out to several of you in southeast Alaska, asked your opinion about that, asked how it may impact some of your operations. I appreciate those of you that responded back to me about that, gave me some good feedback and things I could take to the FAA. So in short, our letter to the FAA basically said that while there's no statistical information that kind of rose to the top that was very obvious as to what our members wanted, because some members said, absolutely, we must keep this RCO. To be honest with you, some of you came back and says, you know what, I never talk to flight service anyway. I don't care if it stays or goes because I don't ever use it. Well, that's a little disappointing maybe. But then others said, well, I'm flying heavier equipment, faster equipment, IFR certified type stuff. Fly in the IFR environment most of the time. And yeah, that would be a little bit of a break in coverage, but we're going to get out of that area fast enough that it's not going to be that big of a concern. So that was the range, the gamut of responses that I got back from my inquiries to several of you in Southeast, which again, thank you very much for your responses. And so with that though, I took that information, and one of the things that I have as a government advocate, government liaison, between our users, our members, and the FAA, is that I'm able to see what's happening in the broader picture, the bigger scope. I'm getting requests from multiple parts of the FAA for information, for comments, for opinions, and I'm kind of keeping track of all this. I am keeping track of all this. And I'm not going to say easy. I almost said easy, and I caught myself. It is not easy, but I'm able to keep an eye on what the right hand versus the left hand of the FAA is doing and try to keep an idea of what the big picture, overarching concept of what's happening with the national airspace system. Now, this is meant to be no disregard and no slight against the FAA what I'm about to say, but we all know and understand that we're very focused on our task and our area of responsibility, and sometimes it is difficult when you're part of a big organization, to know what's going on with the folks down the hall. And so I find myself a lot of times questioning and saying, hey, have you looked at what's going on here and how that may impact this, and what's going on there, and how does this all play together? So I ask a lot of those types of questions a lot of the time. And what I found out and what I realized with this Williams Mountain RCO down in Southeast Alaska is that while by itself it may not be that big of a problem if it were to go away, but the system of remote communication outlets in Southeast Alaska is not going to be as resilient if it does go away. And what I mean by that is if this goes away, if there's anything else in that chain and that system that were to fail, that were to go offline, that needed maintenance, that got washed away in a storm, or anything else happens, what does that do to the health and the vitality of that network of remote communications outlets? I've got some ideas as to what that would do, but I don't have the final answer. I don't really know for sure. And so I posed that question to the FAA. And I got to tell you, I really appreciate the FAA considering that thought process. They've taken that into consideration. They're looking at it from that perspective. And to the FAA's credit, they are starting to look at the health of the system from a resiliency standpoint, not just because of this one comment letter I've written, but because I bring this subject up all the time. And it's not just me. I can't claim complete credit for this. There's other folks that are advocating for the same idea that we need to look at the health of the system in its entirety and how this one thing may affect it down the road, and make decisions based on that, as well as other factors like money and other resources and availability of parts and all of those things that play into that. So I just wanted to let folks know that we at the Alaska Airmen's Association are always interfacing with the FAA, always offering some feedback when we're asked. And sometimes when we're not asked, we still offer feedback, but hopefully in a constructive manner, to be able to help the FAA understand and realize what's going on in the system. One of the key points I made in that letter was that what has traditionally occurred and what has happened throughout the years is that the national airspace system, to use this metaphor, this picture, has very broad shoulders. There's a lot of things in the national airspace system that can help absorb some of the inherent risk of operating an aircraft. When we continually pick and choose and chip away at some of the things that are part of the national airspace system, that on their own merit looked at just myopically at that one thing may not seem to be that big of a deal, but when taken in light of the bigger picture and in the scope of the entire national airspace system, what has that done to the risk level? What has that done to the ability of the national airspace system to help absorb some of this risk that we incur every single time we fly? I propose to you that the gradual erosion of the NAS, for very legitimate reasons sometimes, has basically weakened the shoulders, the broad shoulders that were carrying all that, and has not gotten rid of the risk. The risk is still there. Matter of fact, the risk may actually be even more now because of that. And where does that risk go? That risk goes on my shoulders. That risk goes on your shoulders as a pilot and an operator here in the state of Alaska. You are now tasked with carrying the complete burden of that specific risk. Is that the right thing to do? Is that the safe thing to do? I would argue that most of the time it's probably not the right thing, and it is most certainly not the safest thing to do. But I will say that the FAA has a very difficult road. On one hand, they are responsible for maintaining and implementing infrastructure to take on some of that risk for us, but yet they also have a very limited budget. They also have very limited resources beyond just the financial side of things, and somehow they've got to strike a balance there. And so I don't envy them in their job. I greatly appreciate them reaching out and wanting to know our opinion as users. And I'm grateful that the Alaska Airmen's Association is able to participate in those conversations at that level. So that's an update on some of that, and me and some, I guess, editorial comment and rambling about the national airspace system. And so That's kind of some of my rationale, and maybe you understand a little bit more about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I'm going to wrap up here in the last 5 minutes and talk about the Anchorage Terminal Area and Airspace Procedures, or Terminal Area and Procedures study that's been done by the FAA, and where we are in the Anchorage Class Charlie redesign project, because it is a big deal. It's a major project. A lot of people are wanting to know, hey, when can we comment on this? When can we see this? How do we know what's going to happen? How come the FAA is not talking? All these kinds of things. And first, let me tell you, there is no conspiracy. The FAA is held to a very rigid process. I've talked about this before in these updates. The FAA is being very careful not to step outside of the bounds of what they are legally mandated to do in a very rigid, mandated process. So they are making sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed. Not only are they dotted and crossed, but they're dotted and crossed in the right font to be able to use that, just to show you how serious they are about these things. There is no specific font mandated. I don't mean that. I mean that they're taking it that serious that they are making sure they do this right, because they don't want to have to go back and do this again. So where are we in this process? So I'm going to explain this in a way that is not the way the FAA describes it. And with any analogy, it breaks down when you get too deep into it, so bear with me. But let me explain it to you this way, because this is something that we can understand, folks that aren't part of a normal process of the FAA and that very rigid, strict federal policy. So what the FAA has done is they've come up with a proposal, because the military came to them and said, hey, we really need an ILS in the runway 16 over at Elmendorf. What can you do to help us do that? So the FAA went and they've redesigned the airspace in a way that they think will work. They've been able to protect the airspace coming in for an ILS into Elmendorf. Now, what we have to know and understand here is that this is not a normal ILS, because we're talking about fifth generation fighters and other heavy aircraft. So there's a high component and a low component. So there's two different glide slopes that the military is asking for to be able to come in with an ILS into runway 16 at Elmendorf. We can get into all the reasons why they're asking for that. I think it's a valid request. I've heard their responses to that. If you want to know more about that and want to know why their rationale is sound, please reach out to me, and I'd be glad to have that conversation with you. But I don't want to take this brief time to do that. However, just to say that I think they are warranted in their request. The FAA has tried very hard to accommodate their request and to accommodate the heavy freighters coming in and out of Anchorage International, the passenger airline traffic in and out of International, the VFR and the IFR traffic in and out of Merrill Field, and the float plane traffic and the wheel plane traffic in and out of Lake Hood. They've come up with a proposal that gives them everything they think they need. And so here's a couple of analogies to help you understand what this process it looks like. So the FAA has come to the table and said, here's what we're asking for. This is what we want to do. We're asking for the moon. Another way to look at this is that we are in what's called the Ad Hoc Committee phase of this process. This is where the FAA comes to a select cross-section of the users. And I'm very specific with that language because that's the language the FAA uses. It is a select cross-section of the users. It is not all of the users. It is not the entire public. It is groups like the Alaska Airmen's Association. It is like AOPA. It is like the Lake Hood Pilots Association. It's like the Air Carriers Association. It's like the Airport Operators Council. It's like those bigger groups that represent a broad scope of interest of the users of the airspace. And they come to the ad hoc committee and they say, here's our proposal, let us know what you think. Tell us where you think we got some problems. So to use the analogy that this is very much like a soft opening for a restaurant, where the FAA says, we're going to float this out to a small group of people that know what they're talking about and represent the interest of the complete users of the airspace, and let them come back to us with some potential improvements, with some suggestions on how to make this better, some comments about things that we should just not even consider. and then take that into part of the process. That's where we are right now. And I'm pleased to tell you that the Alaska Airmen's Association, myself specifically, was chosen to be a co-chair of that ad hoc committee. The other chair is Alex Moss. He is Deputy Director of Operations and Security at Anchorage International Airport. I've known Alex for a long time. He's a very good guy. And he and I both are chairing this committee. This committee is going to meet numerous times to come back with a formal written report for the FAA as to what we see as potential problems or things that they got right. I've seen the proposal. I can't really show you the proposal yet, and here's why. Because this proposal that we've been given, 99% chance it's going to change in some way, shape, form, or fashion. The FAA has to accept our comments. They do not have to take them and act on them the way that we'd like for them to. Maybe they will for some of them. This committee does not have the authority or the responsibility to approve or deny the FAA's proposal. The FAA's proposal is what it is. This committee's job is to look at it, not necessarily pick it apart, but to go through and find potential problems and pitfalls. Once this process is complete, which we don't really know how long it takes, there is no timeline for that. Once that is complete, it will go out to the public for the public comment process. And when that happens, you can be assured I'm going to let you know. You're going to know about it. You're going to hear about it. And when that process is to that point, we really need to make sure that we do a good job. And I say we, the public, does a good job of letting the FAA know where we see problems and where we'd like to see improvements. And there's going to be public meetings. You're going to be able to see the proposal when the time is right. I'm going to be giving you a lot of feedback and help you understand what you're looking at, because it's going to be complicated. And I'm going to offer some potential talking points for your public comments. Your public comments are important. It's very important that you participate in that process. Attending the meetings by itself is helpful, but saying something in the meeting, a public comment does not make. You need to actually formally write out that public comment and submit it when the time is appropriate. But again, we are not there yet. We're not at that point of the process. So stick close to watching these updates. I'll keep you in the loop with this. There may be a few additional updates as it warrants to be able to talk more about where we are specifically in this process and what you need to do to participate and voice your opinion and your concerns. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for you this month. Again, apologize for my voice. I'm recovering now from pneumonia. Crazy things that have been going around health-wise here in the state lately, and I caught that RSV virus and turned into pneumonia for me. So here I am. So anyway, you know what to do with these videos. Share them with your friends. If folks have questions about this stuff, feel free to let them watch this video on their own. Reach out to me. You can do that here through YouTube. You can also go to our website, alaskaairmen.org. My contact information is there. And of course, don't forget to buy your raffle tickets. If you haven't seen the video that Trent Palmer did out flying your airplane, the raffle airplane, it was a great video kind of showcasing a little bit about what this airplane is this year. Also want to encourage you to go ahead and get your stickers. The Advocacy with Adam stickers are still available at the Alaska Airmen's office, and you can look and find that in the merchandise section there on our website. Hey, do me a favor. If you've got a sticker, take a picture of wherever you've put that thing. I'm trying to find some thumbnails to put here on the beginning of the videos and try to find some interesting and unique places for that sticker to be seen in the wild. So if you've got a sticker, and if you don't mind doing that for me, you can find my email address already there on the Alaska Airmen's website. So again, I appreciate your attention, appreciate your participation, and I appreciate your patience as we work through this process with the Anchorage airspace redesign. And we'll talk to you again next month.